The first sign of trouble came before we even hit the water. The morning fog on the lake was so thick it turned the pines on the far shore into ghosts, and when I looked at Tom standing by the canoe with his paddle in hand, I thought for a second he looked smaller, like the mist had softened him. We'd been doing this trip every spring since college, a few nights on the water, just the two of us sleeping under canvas, talking about everything and nothing. But this year was different. Tom's hands trembled when he tied his pack shut. He pretended it was the chill, and I pretended to believe him. The doctor had called it manageable, but the way Tom's shoulders stooped told another story. We hadn't spoken much about it, only that this might be our last long paddle together for a while, maybe ever. So we loaded up slow, making sure every strap and buckle was right, like the ritual itself could hold the world steady. The lake was mirror still when we pushed off, the bow slicing the reflection of grey sky. Loons called from somewhere beyond the fog, their mournful cries echoing between the ridges. The air smelled like pine needles and cold water. Neither of us said much for the first mile, the rhythm of the paddles enough to fill the silence. I could hear his breathing, steady, a little laboured, and I matched my stroke to his pace without mentioning it. When the fog lifted, the sun came out sharp and bright, throwing diamonds across the ripples. We reached the narrow inlet by midday, where the river tightened and quickened over rocks slick with moss. The map marked it as an easy rapid, one we'd run a dozen times before. But when I looked at the current that day, I felt a twist of unease. The water was higher than usual from spring melt, churning harder. "You up for it?" I asked, keeping my voice light. Tom smiled, that stubborn grin of his, the one that had started fights in bars and gotten us out of worse scrapes in the woods. "If you are," he said. We hit the first chute perfectly, the canoe sliding between boulders like a knife through fabric. But halfway through the second, a cross-current grabbed the stern, spinning us broadside. I saw the panic flicker in Tom's eyes just before the world flipped over. Cold water swallowing sky, the roar filling my ears, the shock stealing my breath. For a few terrifying seconds, all I could see were bubbles and flashes of sun as I kicked and grabbed for anything solid. Then I felt Tom's arm, and together we surfaced, gasping, clinging to the overturned canoe as it drifted toward the shallows. We dragged it to the rocky bank and collapsed, coughing, dripping, laughing shakily the way you do after you realise you're still alive. Tom's hands were shaking worse now, and when I reached for him, he didn't pull away. The river hissed beside us, the trees whispering overhead. Somewhere downstream, a loon called again, that long, lonely note hanging in the air. Like a question neither of us could answer. We built a fire to dry our clothes, though most of the smoke just followed us around, stinging our eyes. The sun was low by then, turning the river gold where it curved away between the rocks. Tom sat on a log with his boots off, wringing out his socks, his face pale beneath the flush of exertion. I could see how tired he was, but he tried to hide it with a grin. That was always his way. Laugh first, feel later. "Well," he said, shaking his head, "I guess we finally managed to make one of these trips interesting." "Could have just told stories like normal people," I said. He laughed, but it faded quick. And the quiet that followed wasn't the comfortable kind we usually shared. I poked at the fire, listening to the pop of wet wood. I wanted to ask how bad things really were, what the doctor had said, what he hadn't told me, but the words stuck. Out here, the silence felt sacred, and breaking it wrong seemed worse than saying nothing at all. We spread our gear to dry on the rocks. The canoe, dented but floating, lay half pulled from the water like a tired animal. My pack had taken the brunt of the flip, soaked through, a loaf of bread mashed flat, matches ruined. But Tom's old waterproof barrel, the one he'd bought the first year we started doing this, had stayed sealed. He cracked it open and pulled out a tin of coffee, dry as dust. "See," he said, "I still know how to pack." We brewed that coffee right there beside the river, thick and bitter, the way he liked it. Steam curled up through the orange light, and for a while we just sat there, cups in hand, watching the mist drift back over the water. A loon called again, closer this time, and I remembered the first time we'd heard one together 20 years back. We'd been kids then, too eager to notice how rare moments like that would become. After a while, Tom said, "You ever think about what we'll do when we can't do this anymore?" I tried to joke it off. "You mean when our backs give out, or when the wives finally say we're too old to play mountain men?" But he wasn't smiling. He looked out at the current, the reflection of the fire dancing across his face. "No, I mean when the body just stops cooperating, when it won't let you get to the places that make you feel alive." The words hung there between us, raw and heavy as wet canvas. I didn't answer right away. There was nothing clever to say, no way to make it easier. I just reached into my coat, pulled out the flask we always passed around on the last night of our trips, and handed it to him. "Then I guess we'll just find new ways," I said softly. "Different places, maybe. But we'll still find something worth waking up for." He took a long sip, eyes still on the river. "Yeah," he said quietly. "We will." The wind shifted, carrying the smell of pine and smoke. The fire crackled, and for a while we just sat there, two friends drying, out in the glow, listening to the world breathe around us, pretending that time wasn't slipping downstream with the current. The next morning came cold and clear, the kind of chill that sneaks into your bones before sunrise. Mist drifted low over the water again, though thinner now, curling through the reeds like smoke. I woke to the sound of loons and the soft scrape of Tom unzipping the tent. He was already up, crouched by the fire pit, coaxing the embers back to life with steady hands. "You sleep at all?" I asked, rubbing the stiffness from my shoulders. He smiled faintly. "Some. The river's better company than a doctor's waiting room." We packed slow that morning, more deliberate than usual. Every motion felt heavier, like each task carried more meaning. Rolling the sleeping bags tight, lashing down the gear, checking the paddle blades for cracks. We didn't talk much. Didn't need to. Years of trips had given us a kind of wordless rhythm, the easy language of long friendship. Still, every glance carried an unspoken truth neither of us wanted to say out loud. The river was calm when we launched again, glassy in the morning light. But a few bends downstream, the current began to quicken. I knew what waited there. A tight stretch called Widowmaker Run, where the water threaded between two sharp rocks before spilling into an eddy below. We'd shot it every trip, laughing like fools as we bumped through, always soaked but proud. Today, though, I felt Tom's hesitation in the way his paddle paused mid-air. "You good?" I asked. He nodded, but his breathing told a different story. "Yeah, just let's take it slow this time." We lined up the canoe and entered the first chute. The bow dipped, water splashing up over my knees. I called out the strokes. "Right! Hard left! Hold!" And Tom responded. But his strength wasn't there like before. The current shoved us sideways, scraping hard against the rocks. I braced, leaning into the paddle, and we cleared the last drop by luck more than skill, spinning into the calm below. When we drifted into the eddy, I looked back. Tom's face was pale, his arms trembling as he rested the paddle across his lap. For a moment he just sat there, breathing hard, eyes fixed on the water swirling around the canoe. "Hey," I said gently. "We made it. All good." He didn't answer right away. Then he looked up, and what I saw in his eyes knocked the wind from me. Not fear, but grief. "I can't do this forever," he said, voice low, breaking in the middle. "My hands. They'll only get worse. Next year, maybe I won't even be able to hold a paddle." The sound of the river filled the silence that followed. Steady, indifferent, eternal. I didn't know what to say. So I just reached over and gripped his shoulder. "Then we make this one count," I said. "Every mile of it." He nodded slowly, and I saw something shift in him. A quiet acceptance maybe, or resolve. She dipped his paddle into the water again, the motion unsteady but sure. "All right then," he said. "Let's go see what's around the next bend." We paddled on, side by side, the rhythm uneven but real, like two old hearts still trying to keep the same beat against the pull of the current. By late afternoon, the river widened into a lazy stretch, the current slowing to a smooth glide. The sky had cleared to a hard blue, and the sunlight poured down through gaps in the trees, catching on the ripples like shards of glass. We hadn't said much since Widowmaker Run, but it wasn't an awkward quiet. It was more like the kind of silence you earn, the kind that comes after the storm, when both of you know you've made it through something. Tom steered us toward a small gravel bar tucked between two bends, a place we'd camped at years ago. The willows there leaned over the water, their branches flickering in the breeze, and a half-buried fire ring still sat where we'd built it last time. It felt like the river itself had been saving the spot for us. We unloaded in slow motion, muscles sore but grateful for solid ground. I wandered up the bank to gather wood while Tom set up the tent. Every few minutes I'd glance back at him, his movements careful, slower than before. He stopped once to stretch his hands, flexing them like they belonged to someone else. I wanted to step in to help, but pride is a delicate thing between old friends. Sometimes help feels like pity, and neither of us wanted that hanging in the air. When the fire was going, we cooked the last of the sausages on a flat rock, the fat sizzling and popping in the flames. The smell carried across the water, mixing with the sweetness of pine sap and the damp earth. We ate in near silence, listening to the low rush of the current and the occasional plop of a fish jumping. Tom broke the quiet first. "You remember that first trip we took," he said, smiling faintly. "The rental canoe that leaked like a sieve," I laughed, "and the thunderstorm that chased us into that cave by Birch Point. You swore you could start a fire with wet matches." "I did start it," he said, pretending to sound offended. "With half a can of white gas," I reminded him. He grinned, and for a while he looked like his old self again, strong, mischievous, unstoppable. The firelight caught in his eyes, and I realised how much of my own life was tied up in these trips, in these moments beside the water. Later, as the stars came out, Tom got quiet again. He stared at the flames, and I could see something turning behind his eyes. "You know," he said finally, "I've been scared, not of dying, just of stopping, of becoming smaller." The words hit me hard. I poked at the fire, buying time to breathe. "You're not smaller," I said softly. "You're just changing shape. The river doesn't stop being the river when it slows down. It just moves different." He looked up, meeting my eyes across the fire. "You always were better at saying things like that." "Nah," I said, half smiling. "The woods just do the talking for me." He chuckled quietly, the sound blending with the night around us. Somewhere deep in the trees, an owl called, and the wind whispered through the pines. We sat there for a long while after that, watching the sparks drift up toward the stars, each one vanishing like a thought you weren't ready to let go of. Morning came soft and grey, the kind of dawn that feels like a held breath. Dew clung to everything, the tent, the paddles, the grass along the shore. The fire was just a curl of smoke and ash now, but its warmth still lingered in the stones. I woke before Tom and sat by the water, knees drawn up, watching the mist rise off the river. The reflection of the trees wavered with every ripple, as if the forest itself were waking slowly. When Tom stirred, he joined me without a word. We shared the last of the coffee, gritty and lukewarm, and watched the sunlight creep down the opposite bank. His hands shook less this morning, or maybe I'd just stopped noticing. There was peace in his face. Worn, yes, but peaceful all the same. We broke camp quietly. There's a rhythm to leaving a campsite, right? The folding, packing, brushing away footprints, and that rhythm always feels a little like a goodbye. Before we pushed off, Tom stood for a moment by the river's edge. "You think we'll ever come back here?" he asked, not looking at me. I wanted to lie, to tell him yes without hesitation, but the truth rose like a lump in my throat. "Maybe," I said. "And if not here, somewhere like it." He nodded slowly. "Somewhere like it," he echoed, and then gave the canoe a shove into the water. The paddle strokes were slower that day. We didn't talk much, just moved together through the bends and shallows, letting the current do most of the work. Every sound, the dip of the paddle, the drip of water, the rustle of birch leaves, felt sharpened, important. I found myself memorizing them, as if I could trap the moment in my chest and keep it. At one point, Tom stopped paddling and let his hand trail in the water. "Feels colder than it used to," he murmured. "Or maybe we just feel it more," I said. He smiled, eyes on the water. "That's not such a bad thing." We reached the takeout by mid-afternoon. The truck was waiting where we'd left it, sun-warmed and dusty. We hauled the canoe up together, the familiar scrape of aluminum on gravel marking the end of another trip. When we'd strapped it down and stood there catching our breath, I realised I didn't want to climb into the cab just yet. Neither did he. Tom looked at the river one last time. "Guess that's it," he said quietly. I shook my head. "No," I said. "That's just this one." He looked at me then. Really looked. And a small smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. "Yeah," he said. "Just this one." We stood like that for a while. Two men in the hush between endings and beginnings, the sound of the river fading behind us. And as we finally turned away, I thought how some goodbyes don't sound like words at all. They sound like the dip of a paddle, the crackle of last night's fire, the echo of laughter in the trees, and the quiet promise that somehow the current will keep carrying the best parts of us downstream.